Corey, who's our next guest? And this is all part of this 2-hour show every Wednesday that we have stories that Corey Kilgannon's written in the New York Times, plus the New York character, the character study, as it's called in the Times. And you did a story on Father Brian Jordan, of which Malachi has a big connection to.
Right, of course he does. I mean, that goes without saying here. Listen, only at WBAI, folks, can we segue from the stories of a degenerate gambler, Billy O'Connor, retired FDNY comedian, to Father Brian Jordan, who is a Franciscan friar, who is a chaplain at St. Francis College in downtown Brooklyn. And Father Michael, is he on? Yeah, okay. Father Brian Jordan is on the line with us, and I'll let him introduce all the various ways that he performs his duties as a Franciscan friar and a man of faith in Brooklyn, and really a man of the people. I mean, he's a liaison with NYPD police precincts, and he played a spiritual role at Ground Zero after 9/11. He performs duties with a lot of union laborers at work sites, construction sites around the city, including a mass he just said on Thursday at St. Patrick's Cathedral for they call him the Hardhat Priest. He says for the hard hat workers and who lives are lost every year building New York skyline. And so Father Brian, thanks for coming on.
Good morning, Corey.
Yeah. So you were in the. We were laughing before, you and I, when I called you to ask you to come on, that you were mentioned in the Times 3 times in nearly the past week, and I think the only last time a Brooklyn priest scored that trifecta was Father Farrell, who we'll describe to listeners in a minute. But like you said, it's every century, I guess it happens, right?
I hit the Blessed Trinity 3 times in 10 days.
Right, you kept it religious. By the way, the first time was because I was talking to you for the story about this Brooklyn priest 100 years ago, and you mentioned that you and some other members of the clergy in the neighborhood were doing a blessing of the Gowanus Canal, and my immediate reaction was one of bewilderment because it's one of the most polluted waterways in America.
It is the most polluted waterway in the United States.
Yeah, and what was the? Let's just start with that. What was that all about? You were going to bless the Gowanus Canal. What was the?
No, if you want to put a caption to it, it's Earth Day meets.
It was Earth Day, right?
Earth Day meets Pope Francis's encyclical on climate change, and we basically get students and faculty from St. Francis College, from the chaplain. We partnered with the Our Lady of Peace Parish in the Gowanus section of Brooklyn, which is directly 2 blocks away from the Gowanus Canal. So students, faculty, parishioners, old-time members of the parish, we all, the Franciscan Brothers of Brooklyn and the Franciscan Sisters, we all collaborated together to do a communal blessing of the canal.
Right, and poured holy water in, as I recall.
We poured holy water, the hope that the holy water will finally, we've been waiting for a very negligent government for many years to clean it up. So if they can't do it, maybe the divine intervention can start it.
Right. If water can be turned into wine, is that the line of thinking? Maybe
we had after we blessed the canal, we blessed our throats afterwards.
Yeah. So and of course the story that I had originally spoken to you about was the one about Father Farrell, William Farrell, the pastor of a Williamsburg church a century ago, who got into the headlines 100 years ago for standing up to the city's attempt to reform. What the city was saying was a reforming of a lot of the welfare charity system. And since this priest was the head of Brooklyn Catholic Charities, he kind of bristled at this and wound up going toe-to-toe with these government officials who wound up wiretapping his phones. And that became known to the public, and that became front-page news on the Times and other papers all around the city. So. And it was interesting the way you found out about that. You didn't even really know the history of Father Farrell. Very few people do, these days. But how did you actually come across his name?
I had no idea who this wonderful priest was until last July in 2015. I went over towards the St. Peter and Paul Parish in Williamsburg to get a new marriage certificate of my maternal grandparents, Paul Murphy, from County Kerry, and Catherine Farrell from County Roscommon. They were married on August 4th of 1915, so I wanted to do a mass for my family in honor of our maternal grandparents 100th wedding anniversary. And lo and behold, when I looked up and got the certificate, they were married by Father W.B. Farrell. So I went back to the college and researched this Father Farrell, and I was fascinating what this hard-working, dedicated, feisty priest did 100 years ago. He took on the mayor of New York. He took on the governor's office of New York State. He was one tough, determined priest.
Yeah. And I should break in at this juncture and say that I'm sitting next to Malachi McCourt, who I understand you know fairly well.
Good morning, Malachi.
Good morning, my dear man. Are you grand?
I'm doing well today. I know I'm not always right, but I'm never wrong.
Are you delighted that His Holiness the Pope took the name of Francis? Was that odd for a Jesuit?
Yes, for a Jesuit to take the Francis name, it's more than just a matter of a polite gesture. It showed a great healing and concern, and bridged the gap between Jesuits and Franciscans. So Jesuits are a wonderful teaching order. We've had a friendly rivalry for over 600 years, but the Holy Pope Francis has done a wonderful job the last 3 years.
Well, the Jesuits say, "Give me your children, and I have your country," and but
now they want your wallet.
So he didn't take the name Ignatius; he took Francis, and that must have been a great coup for the Franciscan order. And of course, as well as knowing yourself, I was a good friend of Michael Judge, and a grand man too.
He was one of the two Franciscans that inspired my vocation.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
Michael at Siena College was Michael Judge.
Yeah.
The other one I wrote an article about is Father Richard O'Connor. He was the lone Catholic chaplain at Nuremberg. He heard the confessions of all the architects of the Holocaust before they were executed in October of 1946. And he was also a chaplain in Patton's Third Army, and he was the first Roman Catholic priest ever to receive the Bronze Star with his ministry in the battlefield.
Now, the seal, although the history of the Holocaust and the ones who caused it, there's the seal of confession would prohibit him from revealing what went on in the confessions.
That's correct, Malachi. He worked with the Lutheran pastor Henry Gorecki, who wrote an article about his experiences. Father O'Connor chose not to say anything in public. He was offered a lot of money. He was asked to write articles, asked to write journals on this. He chose not to, because not only the seal of confession was it was the seal of confidentiality, which United States chaplains still abide by. But he heard and seen and witnessed many terrible things in the battlefield. And the place of execution in Nuremberg is now a place of education. It's a pre-K place for young German students.
Were they hanged or shot?
They were hung.
Yeah.
Father O'Connor witnessed Hermann Goering commit suicide.
Oh, that's right.
By a cyanide pill given by a German-American soldier, and he witnessed 10 of them be hung on October 16, 1946.
Wow. And so, is there any way that the seal of confession can be forced to be broken by law?
No, never by civil law. There's been many attempts throughout the years. We still have that privilege in all 50 states possessions of a priest. He has a genuine good confession, and the person is contrite. This was challenged some years ago when a Jesuit heard someone admitting to a murder, but it was not a complete confession. The person was not contrite. It was a matter that he had a shared conversation. And it came up the debate that he break the seal of confession. No, he did not, because it was not a true confession of fact, feeling, and forgiveness, and promised never do it again. So the man was arrested. So there's a big fine line between the seal of confession with a genuine confession and what is an admission of truth in public.
So the moral of that story is, I guess, always tell the priest that you're sorry. right?
Right. And
What is the criteria to make it a sealed confession? I mean, you kind of alluded to it, but do you have to admit that?
No, my point is you have to be sincerely contrite for what you've done. Promise that you'll never do it again. You admit it. You go through your own examination of conscience, and you say that may not matter. And if you're given the power of absolution, this is one thing I learned from Father O'Connor years ago when I wrote this in an article. When I asked him to just give me advice about confessions I've heard of the idea of admissions of murder. And Father O'Connor told me, he says, Jordan, he never called me by my first name, he says, Jordan, if they're truly contrite, they're truly remorseful of what they've done, and they want to be forgiven, you absolve them of their sins, but you do not absolve them of their actions.
Well, I say that the Jews have the monopoly on guilt, Catholics have the monopoly on remorse, and Protestants have regrets only. Thank you.
I would agree with that.
You would. And would you say that if Hitler, at the moment just before he kicked off, he said, "I'm sorry, I will never do it again," would he be forgiven?
Well, put it this way: there was a priest interviewed right after the execution of Timothy McVeigh.
Oh, yes.
Who's responsible before 9/11, the worst domestic in Oklahoma City.
Yeah.
So Timothy McVeigh went to confession to this priest in Oklahoma, and he absolved him. And many people criticized the priest for doing this, and the priest just echoed the same sentiment that Father O'Connor said. This man came up to me. He was fully remorseful, fully contrite. I absolved him of his sins. I did not absolve him of his actions. Big difference.
Yeah.
So, Father Brian, tell us a little more about this Father Farrell and how this actually transpired from going to standing up against these city leaders to actually getting his phone tapped and then being called into hearings. He was charged with libel, and how that all went down, and also how the connection to today. What you thought was interesting, that the FBI is trying to crack this this iPhone, and to degrees to which we can be surveilled, legally or not. Or
I believe Malachi McCourt's Hollywood friends or like that should help do a movie about Father Farrell, and because just for the same reasons that you just conveyed, Corey. Even though this was an historical event, it does have great contemporary applications to the present day. Back in 1916, because he took on the city, mayor at that time, a one-term mayor, Mayor Mitchell, was so frustrated with this feisty, tough priest that he put pamphlets in every parish that he ordered to his police commissioner, Arthur Brown, to tap the phones of Father Farrell and other priests from the Archdiocese of New York who were associated with Catholic Charities. And later on, when Father Farrell discovered this, he went public, went to a district attorney, Arthur Swan, in Manhattan to go after those who were responsible for ordering the wiretaps. This was unheard of. This was precedent. I guess NYPD did it beforehand, but NYPD, which is the greatest police department in the world, I work with them closely, I know they have to follow orders from above. They don't do these actions on their own.
Right.
But there were no laws at the time where you had to get a court order to do a wiretap, and because of this particular case and some others, it was directly responsible where we now have to have court orders to do wiretaps on individuals' phones.
Right. You talk about following orders. In fact, the sergeant who they made do this, and he listened from a building in downtown Manhattan and wrote it all down longhand and actually kind of messed up the transcription.
He never went to secretarial school.
Right. I mean, they weren't recording things in these days. They were writing it down, and then when it came time for it was the hearing, I guess it was a hearing. They found his transcription faulty. He said, well, maybe he botched a line or two, so they couldn't use it against this Father Farrell. So not only did he mess up the testimony, but he also was taking a lot of heat for phone tap. He was a Catholic himself for tapping this priest, and he shot himself after testifying with his own service revolver. Right?
Yeah, well, he was guilty, and he was vilified by his own fellow officers for even agreeing to do this.
Mitchell was the grandson of a man who had been sentenced to death by the Brits in Ireland in a rebellion of '78 and commuted to life imprisonment, sent to Australia. He escaped and came to America, went south and became sort of propagandist for the Confederacy. And then Mitchell was his grandson, and he resigned to join the army for the Second World War, and he fell out of
First World War, yeah.
The First World War, yeah.
The child, what do they call him? Because he was short, right?
He fell out of the...
Right, the boy mayor.
The boy mayor.
You got to put a safety belt on.
Yeah, that was it, yeah. He fell out of a plane.
Yeah.
And that was it. So it was a terrible act of... what you call it? Was it vengeful for... divine vengeance.
Divine intervention.
Yes, for doing that to...
no third term.
Yeah.
Especially to an Irish Catholic priest.
Yes, he was not Catholic, of course, Mitchell. He was,
no, he was not.
He was an Irish Protestant.
Correct.
Very rare. What's an Irish Protestant? That's an Irishman on a horse.
Well, that's right.
Yeah.
With great deposits.
Yeah. No crap.
Was there a religious component to this, to Father Farrell's fight with the city, or what?
Yes, he was part of the establishment. He was fully supported by his bishop in Brooklyn, also by Cardinal Farrell in the Archdiocese of New York. But this was Catholic Charities, which was then and still is now the largest social service provider in the United States, and the clear majority of those that Catholic Charities serve then as now are not even Catholic, people of other faith traditions or no faith at all. We just give out the corporal works of mercy and reach out to the poorest of the poor and try to provide for them. And that was the intention of Father Farrell. So he took great umbrage when the city and the state, at that time with no clear explanation and justification, tried to take that away from him.
Father Brian, before we wrap up, just mention a little bit about your work with some of them, like the working people of New York, civil service, construction workers, that type of thing.
Well, I get a diverse ministry. I'm glad my Franciscan provincial allows this and have the opportunity to do so. Besides working at the college, I clergy liaison with the New York City Police Department, the loan chaplain for the New York City Union Construction Workers. I speak fluent Spanish. I work among undocumented immigrants who are victims of fraud and other deception. I also work with a number of people at Kennedy Airport, the Customs and Border Protection, who need some little guidance when some chicanery is going over there by a bunch of fraudsters who are trying to get into the country. I also help out with folks within in our Franciscan bread line at 31st, which is the oldest bread line in the United States history, raise funds for them, for the homeless, which our population is growing. And I try to tell young people there is still a goodness in the church. I know that Catholic Church got bashed a lot in the different ways, but here where we have we celebrate, I think, the death of Dan Berrigan, a great heroic Jesuit priest, that we do have to take a prophetic witness sometimes against an injustice. And sometimes you would take that witness, you might end up in jail. But so are the many other apostles end up in jail for what they believed in.
Okay. And then the Hard Hat Mass. That's a video people can see on the New York Times. The Hardhat Priest. I like what you said about they had sacred hands and people who build.
Just as a concert violinist, just as a heart surgeon, just as a basketball player. Every construction worker in New York City has sacred hands because they build the schools, the hospitals, the homes, the concert halls, the highways, the places we have. If it wasn't for these construction workers, we wouldn't have the structures. Even the place you are right now with WBAI, if it was construction workers, you guys would be sitting in a very precarious position.